Welcome to the second episode of Higher Thinking. I'm Darren Jaffrey, HireView's General Manager for EMEA. Today we have a fantastic guest for you. I'm going to be meeting with Kath Possamai, who's the Head of Talent Acquisition in EMEA for Amazon. I'm looking forward to talking with Kath about her career, the phenomenal work that she did with the British Army when she was at Capita, and her new role here at Amazon. And additionally, we're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at Amazon's state-of-the-art HQ here in London. Deliver your parcel from Amazon at 12 o'clock today. There you go. It had to be, didn't it? It just had to be. Kath, welcome to episode 2 of Higher Thinking. Delighted to be in your amazing office, which
thank you for coming.
We always like to sort of ease our way into this quite gently, so just a few rapid fire questions, if we may, to get to know you a little better, maybe the culture at Amazon. Morning coffee chat or afternoon happy hour?
Oh, well, it depends. If it's colleagues, morning coffee. Friends, afternoon happy hour.
Work from home or in the office?
I have to do both. I would go nuts at home full time. And I really enjoy being in the office, but equally, getting stuff done, home is the best place.
Hire for experience or hire for potential?
Potential. Well, that's hard.
Attitude or education?
Attitude every time.
Best in class benefits or unmatched company culture?
Culture.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, let's go back to the start, which is always a good place to begin, I think. How did you get into the field of talent acquisition, and talk us through some of the roles that you've done?
Sure. So I did a degree in sports science at Loughborough and a master's, and then ended up spending a bit longer there because I really couldn't think of what to do next. And chatting to a friend who worked in recruitment, she said, literally, and I quote, "You're gobby, you'd be good at recruitment." And so I thought, okay. So I like many in the profession, I think, I just fell into it. And I started off in recruitment agency land, in IT recruitment agency, and then worked for Alexander Mann Solutions for 8 years, which was fantastic. And I joined them at a great time. And one of my top bits of career advice always to anybody is join a company that's growing fast. And I joined AMS, they were 140 people, and when I left 8 years later it was 1,500. So I think if you join a company that's growing fast and you are even half good at your job and willing to take a few risks, you can progress really rapidly career-wise.
Sure.
So I spent a great 8 years at AMS, learnt loads, and left them actually only because my kids were very young, and I was in a pan-European role and spending all my time on a plane. And Capita approached me, and the major attraction of Capita was it's a UK-based focused company. So I joined Capita in 2011 and spent 10 years total doing a variety of jobs. I spent some time running internal recruitment for the organisation. I spent some time as group talent director as well, which was really interesting. An interesting period for Capita at that point when I was in that role. And then the last 4 years at Capita were working in the Army recruiting contract that they held, and 3 years of that leading it.
And we're going to touch on that a little bit later on. And then you joined Amazon quite recently.
Yes, August. So I'm kind of 3 months in, so still learning a lot.
Very good, and maybe we'll dive into that a little bit later on. So you just talked about Capita there. Your work at the British Army, or with the British Army when you're at Capita, obviously was an extended period, but it completely overlapped the pandemic, and you received a lot of praise for the work that you did there. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that you were addressing and how you overcame them?
And it's a partnership between Capita and the Army, 10 years. And for the first 6 years, I think both parties, and they both hold their hands up and admit this, both parties have done a lot of not actually partnering and competing rather than collaborating. So when I became chief exec of the partnership, I was fortunate to step into that role at the same time as there was a new Army general on the Army side. And the two of us just recognised that gap. And worked really, really hard to trust one another, collaborate really effectively, take a few more risks as well in the way we approach things in order to really build the team, confidence, morale, willingness to trust one another. The team was about 1,500 people, 500 soldiers, 1,000 civvies, and very different cultures and backgrounds. And because of the years of failure, it was a really kind of downtrodden team, being assaulted and criticised by the press and the politicians, and really, for a situation that wasn't of their own making. So we spent a lot of time working on team culture, team morale, and we also spent a lot of time looking at what could we simplify and improve, what policies could we challenge. So things like the Army medical policy, which is very, very rigorous. We challenged that and worked on how we could contemporise it. And therefore allow more people into the Army. We looked at the strictness of some of the physical fitness standards. Example would be previously the Army would, if someone was 5 seconds too slow on a 1.5 mile run, we would have to defer them for 3 months. And my challenge to the general I was working with, who owned training, was you can't tell me in 14 weeks you can't make up 5 seconds on a run of Army training. And so he said, yeah, of course. Well, let's take some risks. So we had 10% leeway around the fitness standards, and that gave us an extra 700 people a year immediately. So it was things like that, challenging the status quo, challenging received policy, and then working really, really hard as a partnership to deliver the numbers.
Yep.
And then once we did that, it was then getting into the pandemic and working out how we navigated that as a partnership.
What sort of numbers are we talking about in terms of annual recruitment for the Army?
So the Army, at that point, has changed slightly since the recent Defence Review, but there's about 10,000 soldiers, and then about another 700 officers, so that's the Sandhurst intake, and about 2,500 to 3,000 reservists each year. So total of about 14,000.
And an applicant pool of?
We would be getting about 120,000 applicants.
Wow, okay.
Total.
So it's a lot to process. And
yeah, it's the processing, but it's how many of those are actually eligible. Our big challenge, the Army's big challenge, is the eligibility factor. So it's age, it's fitness, it's medical standards, it's the old chestnuts of tattoos, piercings that also preclude people from being able to join the Army. So a real challenge is identifying who are the addressable audience that can join the Army, and then making them consider an Army career.
Yeah.
For many, there's a very small percentage who've run around since the age of 5 with a stick pretending it was a gun, wanting to be a paratrooper. There's a whole load of others who might never have considered the Army as a career, who we needed to get them to think about that as a genuine possibility. And that was the success of some of our marketing over the recent period, was focusing on that.
So bringing things a little bit more to the present and up to date, you're one of a large number of people who've changed jobs recently.
Yes.
What drove the decision to change the role, first of all?
Firstly, I think with the Army role, I'd taken things as far as I could go. The team had been kind of on a full cycle of having been in a tough place and getting through, achieving the targets we were looking to achieve as a partnership, and then actually extending the contract for 2 more years between Capita and the Army. And that, for me, was the final piece of the jigsaw and the final thing to achieve. So I was looking for the next step. And I was really struggling, actually, because in recruiting, I was like, what beats or equals the British Army for complexity, challenge, interest? And I didn't really want to run recruiting for a bank or a supermarket. So I was struggling with what to do next. And then Amazon came knocking, which made me think, aha, there's something that is, as complex, as interesting as the Army could be.
And was it the complexity that was the driver of I mean, obviously you're going from as you said, a really high-profile role in a very high-profile organisation, doing really sort of critical work for the business that you're working for. Sometimes it's hard to transfer that across into the private sector. So what was it about Amazon that got you?
It's partly the international element, because since having done 10 years in a UK-focused role,
it was time to go back.
Kids are older now. I always knew I wanted to go back to an international role at some point. So the chance to be international again was a big driver. The pace of Amazon, I think one of the drawbacks of working in the public sector, no secret, pace is not great generally, and I was really interested to work for a company again that has that kind of pace and entrepreneurialism and ability to make decisions rapidly. And then the other thing, to work in an organisation that has so much influence on the way we live our lives, and the wherewithal and the ambition to keep experimenting, to keep pushing the boundaries, and to be involved in recruiting for an organisation. So being, recruiting is such a critical enabler of that growth. I saw that as really important, and and something that could really make, I suppose, replace the requisite level of purpose, interest that I really found with my Army job.
Very good, very good. We'll touch on technology a little bit later on, but within that, what technologies are you principally using to sort of assess your candidates as they're applying and then moving through the recruiting process with you before they get to the point where you're prepared to make them an offer?
So it depends on the level of hire we're looking at. So at level 3 hiring, we use quite a high degree of automation.
Yep.
And also for campus hiring, which is our level 4 graduate intake hiring, there's quite a reasonable degree of automation, video interviewing, etc. Once you get higher up, it's more traditional manual kind of processes around screening and interviewing. And Amazon has a very tight and rigid quality bar and interviewing process, which they call paneling or looping. So once you get to an interview stage, and this happens at graduate level as well as at the more senior managerial levels, you have to be interviewed by a minimum of 4 people, up to 6 people once you get to the more senior levels. And that's not over an extended period. Those interviews are set in for a 2-3 day max period. And each one of those interviewers will take 2 of the Amazon leadership principles and grill you on them. And it's a very rigorous process in that you are not allowed to talk to one another as interviewers while that's happening.
Okay.
And you all independently enter your feedback, and it's all got to be captured and entered into the system, and independently make a judgment on whether you believe the person should be hired or not hired. And if it's an external hire, that person must, the panel, once the debrief happens at the end, all the 6 people on the panel will debrief together. The panel must agree that that person is going to be better than 50% of people at Amazon at that level, because the idea is if we're hiring externally, we're going to raise the bar with every hire that we make, and each panel will have a trained bar raiser on it. And to be a bar raiser, you have to have been in Amazon 12 months, and you then go through quite an intense training program in order to make sure that you really understand how to be an expert interviewer, how to assess the bar, how to chair those panels and those debriefs. And it's enormously resource intensive process, and it's hugely impressed me. And it's something Amazon's been doing for years, but to be able to adhere to those principles and that practice throughout the period of exponential growth we've gone through, given the time involved, the time commitment involved to do that, is it's really impressive.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, very impressive and absolutely fascinating process. What surprised you since you've joined here?
What surprised me?
Because I'm sure you were, as we all are, as you saw from my phone earlier, customers of the brand. Now you're on the inside of the brand and inside of the firm. Anything surprising?
There's some things which Amazon does incredibly well that, and I've been in a number of corporate organisations, having been worked in outsourcing, you get to be inside lots of other organisations. The ability to access information at the touch of a button is incredible. And as a leader, I have easy access to so much information, data about my team, about the work we're doing. So that has blown me away, really, in a really positive way. The piece around Amazon culture, which people tend not to know, is that it's a very strong writing culture. So a meeting will typically start with a paper, and it will be it's a Word document. It's not PowerPoint. A Word document, no longer than 5 or 6 pages, absolute max. And then in the beginning of the meeting, everybody will read the paper. So if you're in a virtual meeting, you'll all cameras off and go on mute and read the paper for 10 minutes. If you're in a room, you'll sit together and read the paper. And that comes from a belief that people either don't have time to read papers before meetings, but also the importance of making sure everyone in the room is at the same level of understanding and information before you then embark on a discussion.
No, that's excellent.
So it is interesting, and it's very, very different. And apparently, the story goes, and I'm sure this is probably true, that it came from Jeff Bezos being in a meeting years ago, and someone presenting in PowerPoint, and he realised halfway through that he didn't want the slides. What he wanted was the notes, the speaking notes. And he said, look, don't give us the slides, just write the speaking notes. I want to know what's inside your head. And having to write means you have to be much, much more detailed. You can't get away with a pretty picture. So that's quite interesting, and something to really get used to. And you have to. There's no ego, because you have to be prepared to write your paper. Yep. And be in a room full of 10 people who are going to tear your paper to shreds. But that's the point of it.
Challenge and commit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. We talked about it earlier, and clearly working for Amazon, high volume is going to be front and centre of everything you do, but it seems to be a theme throughout your career, basically, when you were doing the Army as well. Can you tell us how you approach high volume hiring specifically, and how you balance elements like speed and assessing job skills with candidate experience to still kind of get people through what can be a challenging process for them?
Great question. So there's a few things. I think from a kind of managing it successfully point of view, plan, and plan again. So really understanding at a granular level what the demand is, when it needs to be delivered, and working backwards from that in order to make sure that you have a really robust plan that can stand things getting in the way as well. I think, there's a plan A and there's also the need for a plan B and C, because you should be able to anticipate most headwinds that might occur, save maybe a pandemic, which I don't think any of us anticipated. And then, managing the process, quality data, being able to really understand the pipeline and what's happening, where you've got backlogs, how you unblock them is critical, and how you handle. So if, I think particularly in a high volume environment, you have a process that's built for the happy path, but having a process whereby if someone falls off the happy path, there's another team that can pick that up, sort it out, and get people back on the happy path quickly, rather than distracting the whole engine. Makes a lot of sense. And then the balancing of speed and candidate experience is a really interesting one, and I think we'll, as an industry, wrestle with it more in the coming years, in that there's a push to, for efficiency reasons, to automate more and more and more. And of course we could automate everything,
of course,
pretty much.
But
having a job is a really, your career choice is a really important personal thing for people. So we have to really get that balance right between what we could and what we should automate, in order to make sure that we're giving candidates the experience they want to join our companies. And that'll be really interesting to see how that develops. And that'll be different for different industries, different job levels. I mean, the Army is a great example. The Army is not the choice to join the Army is a very different choice to joining Tesco's or joining Amazon. It's a lifestyle choice. You might have to make the ultimate sacrifice. You're going to have to move with your job, and so the level of, we had an interesting forced experiment of COVID, of having to automate and do everything remotely for candidates, and actually we found that some candidates loved it. They were much more likely to turn up to their interview or discussion with a recruiter because they could do it from their sofa, but then others really missed the opportunity to have a face-to-face contact and experience with a soldier in uniform that we couldn't do during the pandemic. So I think understanding the nuances of what's right for what audience and what jobs will be really interesting moving forwards.
Challenge for our industry and as technology as well, as enablers of that experience, and also the speed through the process. You can't offset one against the other, basically. They're two halves of a whole. So one of the things that you talked about in an article I read, which I really like, was the power of vision and purpose, which seems to be a recurring theme in your career. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by vision and purpose?
Sure. So, most companies will have a vision statement or a mission statement. Not everybody has a great purpose statement, but I think both are really important. And vision is about, vision should be aspirational. It's about where you want to go, where you want to get to, and we have an enormously aspirational talent acquisition vision globally in Amazon, is to make Amazon the premier destination for Earth's most talented people. So that's pretty aspirational. And that's a great example of a really aspirational vision statement. The purpose statement, which I think is equally as important, which is what are we trying to do that's different and good in the world? Why do people get out of bed in the morning to come in to work in talent acquisition or recruiting and do their jobs? And there are some great examples of purpose statements from the likes of Ford way back when, around democratizing the automobile. That's a hell of a purpose statement. And with the Army, we really had to galvanise the team there behind a purpose statement they could understand and get behind. And that was and the purpose statement there was recruiting tomorrow's Army today, with the emphasis being on the future, because the work we did was going to make, is important for national security tomorrow. So I think having that and having a team that understand and contribute to developing those purpose statements can ensure that that the team collectively can galvanise behind it. So when it's a tough day, when you're under pressure, when your resilience is tested, if you've got a real clarity of vision and a clarity of purpose as a collective team, then facing those challenges becomes a whole lot easier.
It's absolutely a hand-in-hand relationship between the two, basically.
Yeah, I think so.
Makes sense.
We've been doing some work since I arrived, because that was one of the challenges of having a team who've gone through a few leaders, is having that kind of consistency of, so as a team across 15 different countries, speaking many different languages, many different backgrounds and reasons for coming to Amazon, what is it collectively that unites us and keeps us going together forward as a team? So we've been doing a bit of work on that here lately as well.
So as a company, Amazon is known for many things. One of them is front and centre is innovation. A hugely innovative organisation on so many levels. So one would imagine that technology plays a massive role across your entire organisation. But what about technology within talent acquisition? Is there any specifics around the area of hiring technology that you use, and maybe talk about successful outcomes that you've had with hiring technology? A subject very close to our own.
I know it is. It's all proprietary tech. Amazon builds its own. So there's we use a couple of bolt-ons, like HireVue here and there, but it's all built in-house. It's run from a team in the US. So what we're trying to do, the challenge of that for that team is gathering feedback, input from a diverse set of recruiting operations across Amazon Web Services, across operations, to really develop that roadmap and think about what comes next. For me, the challenge should be that we make the candidate experience equivalent to our consumer experience, and our consumer experience is pretty unmatched. You can pick up your mobile phone and with 3 clicks you've bought something and it'll arrive in a few hours' time. But
it's also, I think, the interesting, sorry to interrupt, but it's redefined consumer expectation as well.
Yeah.
If I can't now get something tomorrow or same day, my world's just changed in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years I've been a customer of yours. So in some respects that goes, as you say, across the entire TA experience as well, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And so I think what the team and I are talking about is how do we make the candidate experience equivalent to the consumer experience? And obviously tech is a big part of that, but back to our conversation earlier about high volume hiring and balancing tech and speed with giving the candidates a really genuine personal experience and insight into an organisation before they join it. So that's the trick we've got to juggle.
So obviously, we're very proud to have you as a customer, and you said we're one of the few applications that you use. What's the premise behind the in-house development? That's just the Amazon way?
It's the Amazon way.
Yeah.
The software we use for meetings, most of the world's on Teams or Zoom.
Yep.
We have Amazon Chime, which we develop in-house, and we launch new functionality and updates as we go. It's just always been the Amazon way.
It's the Amazon way. A lot of the projects that we're getting involved with at the moment, and this really started, I think, in the midst of the pandemic, is less about the use of video interviewing and technologies like ours and others in the industry for candidate hiring, but a lot more about internal mobility and how you redeploy the wonderful assets that you've got within your own organisation. Is that a big part of the strategy at Amazon, and if so, how do you manage it? I think you mentioned earlier that when you're recruiting, there's a bar that they've got to be better than so that's already sets the scene for a lot of internal mobility. So tell us about the story here.
To be honest, month 3, there's a load I don't know about internal hiring and how it works. It is a huge part of what we're doing. This year, of the work, 27,000 hires my team have done, just under half will be internal movement and managing internal movement. Yep. The challenge, I think, for Amazon is because we've had so much exponential growth in recent years, it's having enough internal employees with a sufficient tenure in their jobs to be ready to fulfill the demand, if that makes sense. But internal mobility is something it's a hot topic at the moment. We are looking at how we deploy more technology to support it and make it easier. We've recently deployed some tech to support our associates in our fulfillment centres, so that they can much more easily access opportunity and see opportunity across Amazon, because we're really keen to grow as much as we can from within.
Yeah. The world's fairly clearly changed in the last 18 months. and your world's changed more personally within the last 3 months. We hear and talk a lot more about remote hiring and remote working, and it's now an integral part to many organisations. I mean, we're here at Amazon Today's beautiful office that there are people in. I imagine 2 years ago this office would have been a lot busier.
Yeah, it would have been absolutely rammed, I think.
Would have been absolutely rammed to the seam. So things have changed. How have you adapted your hiring processes to sort of reflect that change, basically, that people have in terms of remote working?
Well, I don't think we've adapted. Well, hiring processes, the obvious one is we haven't been doing in-person interviews for the last year and a half, and that's moved seamlessly to do on remote panel interviews. And I think broadly will continue because it's so much more flexible and easy both for candidates and hiring managers to accommodate. So I think we'll see that continue. Our big challenge at the moment is working with our own teams to determine what the new normal will look like. How much flexibility can we retain? How much should we have people in the office in order to keep that team ethos and keep that team connection? How many people actually would rather be in the office than work from home? So those are all the factors we're juggling with, and obviously those are discussions that we need to be having with our candidates as we recruit them in a really transparent way as well. And
you're taking a sort of an employee pulse right now on where they're at and how that looks like it's going to play out going forward?
We're due to communicate with the team early next week,
okay.
And obviously this is all depending on what happens with the COVID situation in the next 2 months.
Sure.
But from January we're trying to move towards if you're based in a corporate office and you're a recruiter, an individual contributor, then we expect to see you 4 to 5 days a month. If you're a manager, we expect to see you 8 to 10 days a month. But no one's counting. We're all grown-ups, and it's more of a framework to help the teams kind of understand what a reasonable expectation is, and to make sure that we have some presence in our key offices and that people can connect with one another.
Yeah, I think that's crucially important. Yeah. As you look back on your career to date,
that makes me feel very old.
I'll rephrase that.
I am very old. Yeah.
As you look back on your career today, who've been some of the most influential people for you personally and professionally that you've worked with, and they've taught you things that you've taken forwards through your career?
Great.
And then
question.
I'm going to ask you what they are.
Okay. So I've learnt loads from an awful lot of people, but there are 2 people probably who stand out. One would be a lady called Dawn Marriott Sims, who started out herself age 16 in recruiting actually, but progressed through and was the chief operating officer of Capita, and it was her who sponsored me into the role of talent director in Capita. And from Dawn, I think I learned a lot about being a female senior leader. She was the first woman I saw who dressed like a woman, not like a bloke in wearing suits. She wore nice dresses, she wore funky heels, she was very comfortable in her own skin. So when emojis were not a thing, she was peppering her emails with emojis. So she was very relaxed and authentic and comfortable that I saw a senior female leader being authentic and being herself.
It's a great word, authentic.
Yeah.
If anyone ever describes you as that, you feel good about that.
Yeah,
that's what
and I
you
think
want to
it's
be,
really
right?
important.
It is
as
important.
a leader, being authentic and not putting on a face is critical. And I think it's really hard work if you try to be someone you're not.
Yep.
And seeing Dawn as a senior leader in a very kind of quite tough male environment in Capita at that time, and acting the way she did was very, very empowering for those women around her to follow. So she was a really inspirational person, and I saw from her as well the power of just recognition. She would take the time at 10:30 at night if she'd been on a visit somewhere just to send a one-line email to recognise someone who she'd met, and it would really make them stand 10 foot tall. So I learned a lot from her about how to lead, particularly as a woman. And so the second person would be a guy called Major General Paul Nansen. He's now retired from the army, but he was my oppo when I was leading the Capita Army partnership. And he was Commandant of Sandhurst for 5 years, and at the same time, and in the Army's Director of Leadership. And I learned a huge amount from him about leadership. It was a really genuinely, although we were leading together, leading the partnership together, for me it was a masterclass for 2.5 years of how to lead, and particularly in terms of how to really empower your teams and really, really trust and devolve responsibility. The Army call empowerment mission command, which is, I want you to go and take that hill, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it, and he really, really followed that ethos with his team, while I was really following empowerment with my own team, and it worked. And one of the things I thought that he did very powerfully, and I think one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader, is to show vulnerability. And I'll never forget him in one of our early meetings when we didn't really know each other very well, and we were about to have to go through a whole bunch of really meaty data and stats on the Army recruiting pipeline. There was about 8 of us in the room. Everyone's kind of a little bit nervous, not sure how to approach one another, and he sat down and said, "Right, when I was at Sandhurst, I was on stats for twats, so you're going to have to give it in words of one syllable." And it was brilliant because we all fell about laughing, and everyone relaxed, and that made the whole meeting easier. And I saw him do that 2 or 3 times with his team, so I learned a lot from him about leadership.
Very good. So we talked about authenticity and vulnerability there, two absolutely great things. So, as we just bring this to a close, Kath, and thank you for your time so far, who else would make a great guest that I should interview next as you pass the baton on? John obviously put you forward.
Well, I suppose, so 2 other women in the recruiting industry who I really admire. One would be Nicola McQueen at NHS Professionals, who was my boss for a while at Capita. Right. And another one would be Katrina Hutchison O'Neill, who has done phenomenal things in terms of setting up her own business in the last couple of years mid-pandemic and growing it exponentially.
Very good.
So either of those would make a great interviewee.
We will be in touch. We always, I always like to end the interviews with the same question to each guest. So the title of the series is Higher Thinking, as you know. What's your one golden rule for successful talent acquisition?
Build a great team and empower them. Get out their way.
Fabulous. With that, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been great fun.
That concludes episode 2 of Higher Thinking, and our thanks to Kath for her time today. It's fascinating insight into her career, from the time she spent doing high volume recruitment with the British Army to the values of authenticity in leadership, which is something I really, really admired. We'll see you next time.